Hello everyone, my name's Matt Payton and part of my role at Radio Centre is to work with Siobhan on being the voice of commercial radio with government and regulators and other stakeholders and showcase its unique value. And sometimes that might be the hard-nosed economic value to businesses and advertisers. Other times it might be radio's role in providing entertainment and companionship to audiences. But one aspect of radio's value that's crucial and sets it apart from other audio services is its role in providing news and information, especially to those audiences that might not be avid consumers of news on other media, what we often think of as audiences beyond the bubble. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. First of all, by briefly setting out the context and commercial radio's role in providing news. Then by running through the findings of some new research which identifies the key audience groups reached by commercial radio, the unique value of commercial radio, and the levels of trust in radio, and the impact this has on how people use radio, especially during difficult times. And it's certainly fair to say that 2020's delivered its share of difficult times and newsworthy events. Although it's easy to forget, the year actually started with a focus on a range of stories that are pretty familiar. Brexit was the dominant theme, with the UK officially leaving the EU in January. There was royal drama as Harry and Meghan stepped back from their duties. Bushfires were raging in Australia and the Trump impeachment trial got underway. But of course, in the end, one news story above all others has come to dominate 2020. Coronavirus has impacted every aspect of our lives in some way, whether it's our daily routine of how we work, where we can go, who we can see, or broader questions of the state of the economy, government decisions and elections. None of us has lived through a period quite like this before, and this creates unique challenges for all of us, none more so than for news media, who've got a real responsibility to sort fact from fiction and provide regular, up-to-date and accurate information to help us understand what's happening and why. This role has become increasingly difficult in recent years, but also increasingly important with the rise of fake news spreading across social media. Despite these challenges and the operational issues of news gathering in a pandemic, we know that commercial radio has gone above and beyond during this period, providing uninterrupted news output even in the height of lockdown. In fact, commercial radio has stepped up and invested more time and resource in informing listeners. A survey we ran earlier this year following the first national lockdown found that commercial stations were broadcasting 25% more news bulletins and for 28% longer. But it's also worth remembering that news on commercial radio takes different forms. There's a number of national news and speech networks covering news in depth, most notably LBC, which has gone from strength to strength in recent years, especially since it began broadcasting nationally, featuring the big news stories of the day and often setting the agenda, establishing itself as a genuine alternative to the BBC and even launching its own dedicated rolling news service. The presence of other players like Times Radio is also helping extend choice and plurality. But it's also important to remember the crucial role played by many other commercial stations that are principally about music and entertainment. Networks like Heart and Hits Radio not only draw huge audiences, but also deliver regular updates on important national and local news stories produced from their broadcast centres across the country. Small and independent stations, irrespective of their size and coverage, also have their own professional news teams gathering local stories and reporting the national headlines supported by suppliers like IRN and Radio News Hub. It's also worth noting the way that news provision on commercial radio has evolved in recent years. While the mainstay of radio news remains the bulletin at the top of the hour, radio journalists are increasingly comfortable providing video news, whether that's on location or in the studio, through interviews or pieces to camera that are clipped and shared online, providing radio stations with another way of disseminating news and extending audience reach. Of course, radio's had to adapt and innovate in this way because news consumption habits have changed, most notably the growth of digital platforms and social media as a widespread means of accessing news, information and journalism. So radio news teams are reacting to the demands of their audience. But it's also remarkable in the last decade of digital disruption and changing habits, one thing has remained constant: radio is consistently being found to be the most trusted medium for news in Europe in every year since the European Commission started gathering this data in 2009, delivering the highest levels of trust and connecting with mass audiences. And it's this combination of investment in content, high levels of trust, and significant audience reach that make commercial radio news a force to be reckoned with. Its blend of news and information alongside music and entertainment is still a winning formula, reaching a record audience of over 36 million people for 13 hours a week. But of course, not all news consumers are created equal. For some, radio is just one of many sources that they'll access on a daily basis. For others, it might be their only regular source of news. We wanted to understand more about the audience for radio news, so we asked independent research company, Differentology, to look in more detail at the commercial radio audience and consider the way it delivers value, secures trust relative to other media, and the impact that this has on the habits of the audience, particularly at difficult times or during emergencies. We were especially interested in finding out more about how radio connects with broader audiences who might be seen as outside the metropolitan bubble and are less engaged with other media. By asking a series of questions on the behaviours and habits of the commercial radio audience, the researchers were able to identify three main groups. Super seekers who listen to radio news but are constantly checking news updates across other media. Enthusiasts who are also a big part of the commercial radio audience and value the news, but often want to know more. And outsiders who like to stay informed, but don't necessarily seek out updates on news and current affairs across media. There's also a very small group who have no interest and actively avoid the news. It's worth stressing that commercial radio connects with all of these audiences. They're all commercial radio listeners. But what the research revealed was a particularly deep and unique connection with this group that we're calling outsiders. So who are the outsiders? What are their key characteristics? Unsurprisingly, they're less likely to live in London or southeast of England. The majority are not ABC1 socioeconomic group, in contrast with the other audience groups. They're more likely to be female. They're less likely to identify with political labels of left or right. Their outlook and limited engagement with politics means that they're much less likely than other audience groups to seek out political news in the press, only 11% saying they would do so. They're also more than twice as likely as other groups to say that they never read a newspaper at all, and significantly more likely to say that they never use social media. So it'll come as no surprise that outsiders are much less likely to watch or listen to dedicated news or current affairs programmes. Only a tiny proportion listen to the Today programme on Radio 4, slightly more watch Newsnight, but significantly less than the other groups. But it would be a mistake to class outsiders as completely disengaged. They are voters, and interestingly, they do vote, and in significant numbers. 77% voted in the last election, compared to the average turnout of 67%. So these outsiders are an intriguing group for politicians, for advertisers, and for media companies. And it's notable that commercial radio connects with this group in a particularly powerful way. Commercial radio is their top source for news in the morning and ranks first for both national and local updates at this time of day, even more so than the other groups. This feeds through to commercial radio being their most useful source of regular updates overall. It's also their top source during emergencies. While they may not follow every twist and turn of a breaking news story, commercial radio is where they go to keep up. As a result, outsiders also rank radio as their most trusted news source. These perceptions and preferences from the outsiders are also part of what drives their listening behaviour. So outsiders are twice as likely to say commercial radio is their most useful source of regular news updates, opposed to BBC radio. Commercial radio is also the news source that outsiders are least likely to avoid. They're twice as likely to avoid or switch off TV news than commercial radio. They're also much more likely to avoid social media. This particular connection with outsiders is crucial, but some of the broader themes of trust and impact can be found across all commercial radio audiences, especially during difficult times. Most significantly, our research confirmed that radio remains the most trusted source of news across all audience groups in the UK. Almost 8 out of 10 say that they trust radio, with TV not far behind. And social media still the least trusted. One of the factors that drives this scepticism over social media content is undoubtedly concerns over its reliability. 7 out of 10 listeners express concern about the rise of fake news. That underlying concern also fed through to the behaviour during the pandemic, where half of listeners said they were avoiding social media due to fears about inaccurate or misleading information. 40% also said that social media made them feel anxious during this time. Compare and contrast that to the way listeners have relied on radio. Overall, 80% said they found radio to be a reliable source of regular updates, 74% that it provided vital national news, and 72% that it provided news relevant to their local area. This also underpinned a surge in listeners identifying radio as the best source of regular updates during the pandemic, up more than 50% compared to usual. So, to sum up, what are the key takeouts from this research? Well, radio is starting from a strong place. The investment in its brands, its innovation in delivering news content means that it's reaching huge audiences of all types and is able to meet the different needs of all types of news consumers. However, commercial radio has a particular connection and an advantage in reaching outsiders from beyond the bubble. This group's much less likely to buy a newspaper or use social media, and they don't seek out news or politics or current affairs, but they do vote and they do want to stay informed. Commercial radio delivers significant value for this group. It's the medium they turn to first thing in the morning for regular updates and during emergencies. As a result, it's also the medium they're least likely to try and avoid, supporting that high reach and impact. Radio's high value and reliability for all audiences also helps support its role as the most trusted medium for news, with social media remaining the least trusted. And this is something we've seen in action, particularly over recent months, with millions relying on radio more than ever during COVID-19. So we'll be publishing this report today and sending copies to ministers and every member of Parliament. And we hope that it will help to demonstrate to them the particular value of commercial radio, the opportunity it provides to reach audiences, and why it deserves their support more than ever. But don't just take it from me, hear it directly from some of the brilliant news teams that are working in commercial radio.
Hello, I'm Nick Ferrari. I host the Nick Ferrari Breakfast Show on LBC on weekdays. We've got that one covered. And I wanted to say a few words as we come to the end of this year about this incredible pandemic. And although I may look old enough, I wasn't around during World War II. I have never experienced anything like this. And it showed the incredible relationship that radio has with its consumers or its listeners. And if you know anything about me, you'll know that actually I'm an old print bloke and I have never seen anything like it. And that's what I think this Beyond the Bubble report illustrates, because on LBC we were very fortunate. We had people such as Boris Johnson and other cabinet ministers come in and taking calls. We had a panel of experts helping people, everything from their employment rights to getting their money back for flights, whatever it might be. The relationship between the radio station and the presenter and the listener, looking to us not just for news, which of course is what we provide, but for information and for help, has never been so crucial.
Now, commercial radio news is of massive importance to our listeners, and they might only be listening to a short clip on a music radio station, but don't be fooled, millions of people are listening and engaging with that content, and they're usually people who don't actually get their news from many other sources, which makes my job such a privilege to be able to provide that content.
We know that commercial radio has risen to the challenge during the pandemic, extending bulletins, gathering local content and using our national and international material to fully inform listeners at a time when clarity and trust are critical to our output.
The pandemic continues to present us with many challenges, not least maintaining home-based studios for our journalists. And crucially, we've also been able to explore more good news stories, devoting increased coverage for struggling charities, from which there have been many inspiring examples of community spirit.
Since March, our news teams have been working almost exclusively from home, meaning our dining room tables and garages have become our studios. In an era where claims of fake news are peddled in a bid to discredit the media, we've been able to cut through the conjecture and speculation and to bring people the key facts in an easily consumable and immediate form.
It was vital that while the world around our listeners was changing, we didn't sound any different. More than ever, we've been using tools like Zoom to do interviews, sharing not only the audio in bulletins, but videos on social media. For many people, their daily routine just didn't exist anymore, but they still expected to hear the news every hour on KMFM, and we made sure that continued.